Next witness, please, Mr. FitzPatrick.
Thank you, my lord. Dr. Anderson, please.
Look me right hand, face the registrar, please. You swear that the evidence to be given by you to the court and to the jury sworn touching the matters in question between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, sir?
I do.
Dr. Anderson, you are a duly qualified medical practitioner, a graduate of what university in medicine?
Edinburgh,
In what year, doctor?
1940.
And after your graduation, what postgraduate work, if any, did you do?
I did postgraduate work in London, New York, Boston,
In what specialty, doctor?
in the specialty of pathology.
And your position at the present time, with what hospital are you associated?
With the Toronto General Hospital and the University of Toronto.
In what capacities, doctor?
At the Toronto General Hospital, I am the Deputy Pathologist in Chief and an Associate Professor of Pathology at the university.
Thank you, doctor. Now, doctor, will you tell his lordship and the gentlemen of the jury, please, if you had occasion to perform an autopsy on the late Robert Paget?
I performed an autopsy on Mr. Paget on the day of his death.
And what was the reason for your performing an autopsy?
To establish the immediate cause of death, to confirm the clinical findings that had been previously described.
And were you able to confirm the cause of death that had been the clinical diagnosis?
It was possible to show during the course of the routine autopsy that the multiple fractures previously described and at some length by Dr. Dewar were in fact present essentially as he had described them. The suspected immediate cause of death, also described by Dr. Dewar as a probability, was confirmed, and in this regard I refer to the presence of a large pulmonary embolus, which I regarded as the immediate cause of death in this case.
Thank you, doctor. And did your autopsy disclose any abnormality of Mr. Paget's which was not associated with the accident?
Yes. In the routine that has been evolved for the performance of an autopsy, it is customary to examine the individual bones that go to make up the spine, the vertebral bodies. In performing this part of the autopsy, it was noted that one of the vertebral bodies, one of the bones that go to make up the spine, was abnormal in color, abnormal in consistency, and distinctly different to the naked eye from the adjacent bones. Because of this abnormal finding, portions of the vertebral body were removed and subsequently processed for microscopic examination. The microscopic examination revealed that the abnormality that I have described was due to the presence of a bone tumor, which is technically referred to as a myeloma. This was the only abnormality that was noted.
Now, doctor, what can you tell us about the probable duration of Mr. Paget's life once he had a solitary myeloma?
I should perhaps answer your question in an indirect way by saying that it is difficult to prognosticate about the course of a malignant tumor in any given individual. The life history of a malignant growth is the result, or our knowledge of the life history is the result of accumulated statistics. Therefore, while it is possible, and I am able to say from my professional knowledge that myeloma is a malignant disease and is therefore fatal, that the course in any given individual is impossible to determine ahead of time. On the average, or on a statistical basis, it is accepted that after a diagnosis of myeloma is made, the average duration of life is in the region of 3 to 4 years.
Does the fact that this myeloma was single or solitary, is that of any significance in making a prognosis of this man's life?
Solitary myelomas on the average are more slow in their progression. They progress more slowly than do multiple myelomas. The term solitary, of course, refers to the fact that at the time it is observed, the tumor is present in only one location. It is in the natural history of the tumor that it inevitably becomes multiple. And therefore, that interval of time which is occupied between its solitary manifestation and its multiple manifestation may be added to the life history of the tumor and presumably the individual.
Well, doctor, is your prognosis of 3 to 4 years based upon statistics of validity with respect to a man whose myeloma was solitary at the time of observation?
It is my opinion that the period of 3 to 4 years is within the limits of what is generally accepted statistically. It is true that on occasion, patients who have solitary myelomas live considerably longer, and one can find in medical literature authenticated reports of cases in which the duration of life has been 10, 12, 15 years from the time of diagnosis. But these cases are described because they are exceptional. An opinion as to prognosis, then the personal experience of any single practitioner of medicine whose number of cases must necessarily be small.
And is that so even though he were a specialist in this area?
Yes, I would say that this is so.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, my lord.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, my lord. Doctor, you weren't present in court, unfortunately, when the earlier medical evidence was given, and it was given by Dr. Leonard Davies rather than by Dr. Dewar. I presume that you read Dr. Dewar's report and were perhaps confused by that. In that Dr. Davies and Dr. Dewar worked closely together on this case, would you agree that Dr. Davies' opinion was as reliable as would have been Dr. Dewar's, and that we can accept his evidence without question as to the nature of the injury and the cause of death?
I would be in agreement with this.
So that we better understand, Doctor, what, in simple terms, is the study or the specialty of pathology?
It is the study of disease processes in their various forms and manifestations.
You would take it, sir, that as a pathologist, you would be concerned with the detection of a malignant tumor, but not likely with its treatment after detection.
I am not involved in the treatment of tumors or of disease generally.
Right. Would it follow then that those who are concerned with the treatment of diseased tissue would be more apt to be concerned with changes and developments in the therapy that might apply to those tissues?
This would seem reasonable.
It's a fact, is it?
It is a fact that the individuals who are concerned with therapy would be much more knowledgeable about the forms of therapy and their effects. I think that in the reading of medical literature and pathological literature, as the natural histories of tumors and malignant disease generally becomes influenced by innovations in therapy, that such information is reported in pathological literature as well as in the various therapeutic journals.
No doubt. Do you know Dr. James William Meakin of Princess Margaret Hospital?
I know Dr. Meakin.
He, I believe, is a practicing endocrinologist. engaged in the study of cancer, its treatment, as a specialty,
Yes, this is so.
more or less to the exclusion of concern for other diseases than malignant? Would you accept him as an expert in the area of cancer treatment and its efficacy?
I think that this would be beyond question.
Would it be more usual, doctor, for you to see diseased tissue of the type we're concerned with here as an end result, that is, after the patient has died?
Would it be more common for me
Yeah.
to say? Not necessarily so. The greater part of my professional career has been as a surgical pathologist, which means that my concern in the area of diagnosis has been with living patients.
Having had that concern then with the diseased tissue of living patients, having detected the disease, the matter of its treatment then falls to someone else after you.
This is so.
Is it right, doctor, that it would not be possible for you, in this case and perhaps in any other, on detecting the myeloma, to state its age, to say when it began and how long it had been developing up to the time that you saw it?
I do not know of any method or of any technique which would allow me to say how long the tumor had been present.
Right. So that the tumor that you discovered in Mr. Paget was of indeterminate age.
This is so, in my opinion.
And the statistics that you've spoken of, and I think you made this clear in your evidence in chief, relate to those patients who have been studied from the date of detection to the date of death.
Yes, there is no other way in which to base this.
Obviously not. And the age of the disease in each of those patients would be equally indeterminate at the date of detection.
Well,
Perhaps we can't get closer to it than that.
I cannot give you any specific
Fine.
source
Thank you,
or
Doctor.
single source.
I have no other questions. Mark.
Re-examination.
No, my lord, thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Any reply, Mr. Goudie?
Yes, my lord, I have one witness. I intend to call it Dr. Meekin to give evidence in reply to my friend's evidence from Dr. Anderson.
My lord, I object to my friend calling Dr. Meekin at this time.
Very well. Perhaps I can anticipate a certain argument. I think perhaps the jury should be excluded during the course of this.
Thank you, my lord.
Members of the jury, another of those occasions has arisen where I must rule on the admissibility of certain evidence. So I would ask you to retire to your jury room for a few minutes, please.
Members of the jury, please retire to the jury.
Perhaps so I can appreciate Mr. FitzPatrick's objection, you could give me very briefly what you expect this witness will testify to.
Yes, my lord, there are certain differences in my submission, significant between his assessment of the statistical literature available. He is an endocrinologist whose present life's work is the treatment of cancer, and he's more familiar with the treatment, its possibilities, and its probable effect on this deceased than would be the pathologist whose evidence we have at the moment.
Do I gather that you propose to lead evidence in contradiction of Dr. Anderson, was it Anderson?
Dr. Anderson. yes,
Anderson's
my lord.
evidence dealing with life expectancies, of this life expectancy of this particular individual?
Yes, my lord, that's it basically. And two, so that you have the whole picture, I'm going to ask the doctor to comment on, apart from statistics, his professional opinion based on his experience of the prospects of treatment for this man.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. FitzPatrick.
Thank you, my lord. My respectful submission to your lordship, this is a very glaring example of counsel seeking to obtain an advantage by splitting his case. There's no question that the evidence of Dr. Meekin, as described by my learned friend, is relevant. It modifies for the late Mr. Paget his life expectancy, at least it modifies the life expectancy given by the actuary, Mr. Lawfrey. It had to be modified because it's known, and the fact that Mr. Goudie was well aware of the fact is shown by the fact that he adverted to it in his opening.
Yes, he commented that post-mortem examination discovered cancer, which nobody knew about until that time.
Yes, my lord, and in my respectful submission to your lordship, it's only if Mr. Goudie could say that there was evidence given by Dr. Anderson which had only become relevant when Dr. Anderson gave that evidence. The life expectancy of Mr. Paget has been in issue from the commencement of this action. And if Dr. Meekin had given his evidence first, it would have been possible for the defendant to have called evidence to meet that. There is a very substantial tactical advantage in being able to lead your evidence after the other evidence to which it relates. And if Mr. Goudie is permitted to call Dr. Meekin in reply, by splitting his case, he has deprived the defendant of this tactical position that he ought to enjoy. And as your lordship knows, there are few enough tactical advantages that a defendant enjoys in the conduct of one of our actions. Thank you, my lord. I might point out to your lordship the case with which your lordship is well acquainted, the Alcott case, which says counsel ought not to be permitted to split his case. Thank you.
Mr. Goudie.
Well, all right. I gather that the problem we're faced with stems really from the statement I made in my opening, that if nothing had been said at that time, that perhaps my friend's argument might be different. If I had not spoken as I did and had led no evidence other than I led in the case, and my friend then called no evidence of Dr. Anderson's sort, the need to call Dr. Meekin's only becomes obvious and important to the case if my friend leads the evidence that he did through Dr. Anderson.
I don't know about that. What troubles me is my understanding of the rule of evidence is that you put in all of your evidence on a particular issue when you're presenting the plaintiff's case.
But
And surely the issue of Mr. Paget's life expectancy is a pretty vital issue in this case, and you did lead some evidence on that issue when presenting the plaintiff's case.
yes, indeed. But in terms of the evidence only, and putting aside what was said in the opening address, my case is best advanced by leaving the actuarial evidence to the jury and making no mention whatsoever of this person's life expectancy being any different than that.
That's right, but if you elect to take that chance, are you then entitled to call other evidence to buttress a greater life expectancy than the defense might have shown?
Only in this sense, my lord, that it isn't in my client's interests, it's not a part of my case that I'm incumbent to lead, that he has a life expectancy other than the statistical. And the need to advert to that at all only arises when my friend, if and when my friend, leads evidence to show something other than that to be so. It's the furthest thing from my client's interest in the world to call either doctor, really. Because until the jurors have heard from a doctor, they're entitled, if they wish to draw that inference, to believe that Paget would have lived for 22 years. So that if we forget for the moment about my having mentioned it in the address, it would be perfectly proper in my submission to put in the case on its best footing, which is that this is a person who is a part of the whole population with no special considerations. And if Mr. FitzPatrick had been unable to call Dr. Anderson, or ill-prepared and unaware of the autopsy result, then far be it from me to call any medical evidence pertaining to that. The necessity only arises when he, as part of his defense, attempts to show that the only evidence before the court, which is the statistical average, doesn't apply to this person. Up to that point, I haven't conceded that it doesn't.
But the statistical evidence that you led through the actuary is surely only some evidence to assist the jury in deciding how long, on the balance of probabilities, the dependency is going to exist.
Right? And in the
And
absence...
once you have chosen to lead any evidence on that issue, surely you're restricted to, surely you must then make the decision. Either I call all of my evidence, or I put in the little bit I choose to put in and take my chances on what the defense does. But now to be able to come back after he has led all of his evidence, casting very serious doubt on the statistical length or estimated length of life of this man, for you then to be able to call other evidence to buttress your case a bit by at least getting it up above what Dr. Anderson said. And that's what concerns me, is whether that is case splitting or whether it isn't.
I appreciate the concern, my lord. I still feel, and I'm critical of myself for this, that the problem wouldn't have arisen, and that it only is a problem when taken in the context of my opening remarks.
I don't think so. I think that adds to your problem. But having led some evidence to, that no doubt you had planned to invite the jury to say, well, dealing on probabilities, you've got the Statistics Canada estimate of how long a person's going to live, of that age is going to live in Canadian male of that age is going to live. So it's some evidence upon which you can say is a probability this man in good health to live that long, or close to it.
If I were going to call another actuary, I think I'd be in terrible difficulty. But this, although it deals with expectancies, it would be my submission, is a totally different consideration. It's something, I'm not trying to get around the evidence of the actuary. I'm not trying to impeach my own witness, as it were, and in that fashion split the case. I'm not leading evidence with respect which I had any obligation to lead. This is where your lordship and I differ. I think perhaps that's the crux of the whole thing. That if my friend had been of the sort to be unprepared, then I wouldn't have mentioned it in my opening. But knowing Mr. FitzPatrick as I do, I know that he will be, and that this is something that I'm going to have to anticipate, and I think I made a tactical error of anticipating it in the opening. But apart from that, with respect, and having said it then 3 times, I'll leave it. If I had closed my case, as I did, and if he had not called the evidence, my case was complete, and the only need to vary it arises because of the defense. And that is the situation which gives rise in every instance to the need for reply.
Thank you, Mr. Goudie. Mr. FitzPatrick, any reply?
Thank you, my lord. I'll try just to recapitulate, because I think your lordship has placed my argument better than I did originally. We could perhaps analogize to the position of where counsel moves to have an action dismissed and is then put to his election. He makes an election. In my submission, Mr. Goudie's predicament didn't arise from his having mentioned this particular evidence in his opening, but it really arises from his existence. When he knows that he has evidence to meet some possible evidence, he really then makes an election whether he'll be better to call that evidence to say that his original position is modified by 20%, anticipating that maybe the defendant's evidence will say it's been reduced by 50%. If he decides that the probabilities are that the defendant's evidence is going to so substantially reduce his original contention that he's better to put his own evidence in at that time, he makes that decision. And in my respectful submission, my lord, he should be kept to that decision, because otherwise he is in fact splitting his case and thereby deriving, in my respectful submission, an improper tactical advantage. Thank you, my lord.
Okay. The objection which Mr. FitzPatrick has raised is one that causes me very grave concern. The Elcott case, which was decided a few years ago by the Ontario Court of Appeal, points out the grave danger that the plaintiff faces in this case, and pointed out, I think, a very rigid rule against case splitting. After considering the arguments of counsel, I am in some doubt as to whether this truly is an example of case splitting. And I think, in the interest of justice, when I am in some doubt as to the admissibility of what I gather will be rather crucial evidence, I should lean in favor of admitting it. The basic rule with respect to admission of evidence is that if it's relevant and not excluded by one of the exclusionary rules, it should be admitted. Being in some doubt as to whether this evidence is excluded by one of the exclusionary rules, I propose to admit the evidence and permit the witness to be called.
Thank you, my lord.
Thank you, my lord.
Mr. Registrar, would you ask the jury to return, please?
Bring the jury back, please.
Goudie, would you call your witness, please?
I'll call Dr. Meekin. Dr. Meekin?
Your right hand, face the register, please.
You swear that the evidence to be given by you to the court and to the jury sworn touching the matters in question between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you.
I do.
Dr. Meekin, you're a qualified medical practitioner licensed to practice in Ontario.
I am.
Where did you graduate, sir?
Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario,
In what year?
1953.
And did you, after that, do postgraduate studies of any sort?
I did.
In what field?
I spent 3 years in general internal medicine. I spent 2 years doing a degree in biochemistry at the University of Toronto. And I specialized in endocrinology at Harvard University, Boston for 2 years.
Your present post?
I'm a physician at the Princess Margaret Hospital in the Ontario Cancer Institute and an associate professor of medicine at the University of Toronto.
And is your chosen field of specialization, endocrinology, in some way linked with the study and treatment of cancer?
Yes, endocrinology has to do with the effects of chemical substances called hormones on cells of the body. Cancer is a disease in which there is a loss of the control mechanisms of the growth of cells in the body. Several species of cancer are very much dependent on natural hormones for their growth. And my interest in the treatment of cancer, which is often referred to as oncology, grew out of my background in endocrinology and an interest in how cells and their rate of growth are controlled.
Is your present practice confined to the treatment of cancer?
Yes, for all intents and purposes it is.
And for what length of time has that been so?
This has been true for 12 years.
Have there been, in the course of that 12 years, advances in the science not only of detection but also treating cancer of
Yes.
various sorts?
Yes, there have been.
And we've spoken of cancer generally. We're concerned here, as you know, with a solitary myeloma. Is that, in broad layman's language, a form of cancer?
It is.
Doctor, you had no direct connection with Robert Paget, but I believe you have had an opportunity of reviewing the autopsy report
I have.
and of hearing at least a portion of Dr. Anderson's evidence,
Yes.
and have some familiarity with his case. Have you, from a practical point of view, some familiarity with the condition we're concerned with, the solitary myeloma?
Yes.
Is it something that you have seen in your practice?
Yes.
And is it something which you have treated?
Yes.
Is it in any sense, does it stand apart from this generic term cancer in terms of treatment, or is the treatment applicable to it of the sort that applies generally? What I'm getting at, really, and to be more direct, is are the advances which have been made in therapy that we've spoken of generally advances, in a sense, in the therapy applicable to the myeloma?
Yes, there have been advances in the treatment of myeloma.
And is there research going on, even at present, to further develop those advances,
Very much so.
and to find new advances?
Yes.
And is a good deal of money being spent toward that end,
Yes.
with a certain degree of success from time to time?
I believe so.
Dr. Anderson referred to a statistical basis for his prognosis in this particular case. If I were to ask you your opinion as to the probable life expectancy of this person, a 48-year-old Canadian male, apparently otherwise in good health, would you be drawing on that sort of material, or would you be drawing on your personal experience, or would it be a combination?
It would be a combination.
And dealing first of all with the sort of material that Dr. Anderson used as a basis, are you familiar with the writings that there have been and the accumulation of medical knowledge as it applies to a solitary myeloma?
Yes, I am.
And with that as a basis, and add to that your own experience, what can you tell the court as to the range of lifespan for the victim of a solitary myeloma?
Well, to begin with, there is an unknown period of time prior to the detection of this tumor in the usual course of events. Once that detection has been established, the world literature that I have had an opportunity of reviewing gives a range of life expectancy for people with solitary myelomas all the way from 7 months to in excess of 26 years. The best estimate I've been able to make on the average expectancy during that very broad range from the time of detection is in the order of 5 years.
Is this an estimate that reflects, to some extent at least, your own personal experience?
Our personal experience at the Princess Margaret Hospital is a collective one, in that several of my colleagues and I have seen these patients over the last decade. There have been approximately 20 patients. The longest survivor at this point in time is 13 years. The average life duration for this group of patients at this time fits with the world literature at about 5 years.
When you speak of the world literature, and I take it that's the accumulated knowledge of everyone who's contributed to the study of the problem, does that world literature include in it people of various ages?
Yes.
To belong to this undesirable club, I gather you need only have the disease detected.
Yes.
So that you may be of any age, you may have any number of other physical complaints, or does the literature confine itself to people who have just this problem?
No, all of the patients to which I referred, both in the world literature and in our own experience, have had an assortment of other illnesses as well.
Right. And does the world literature, as a statistic, confine itself to those subjects who die of this disease, or simply those people who die while they have it?
Generally speaking, my interpretation of the literature is that these life expectancies are what we call crude survivals, in that they are generally not corrected for the natural causes of death which may occur quite independently of the tumor. In a few instances, they are corrected.
But by and large, not?
That is true.
What is the effect, then, on our understanding of the particular disease of including in the statistic people who have died because of some other cause?
It would be, of course, to shorten the crude survival or expectancy of life.
In that we understand Mr. Paget to have been apparently well, active, vital, no illnesses or symptoms. Can we rigidly apply those world statistics to him, or does the fact that he is in that category give him some preferred relationship to those statistics?
I cannot give you a statistical statement in answer to your question. My opinion, though, would be that if he were well otherwise, this would tend to prolong his survival.
Now, you've spoken of this, the stage before detection. And I think you've said that it's of an indeterminate length, that is, we don't know how long it is. Is it material in the treatment of myeloma that there be early detection? Is your job easier the earlier it is detected?
My opinion is yes. Again, I don't have hard statistical information, but my opinion would be that the earlier it is detected, the easier it is to treat, which is true of most neoplasms.
Right. Now, if we were to assume that Mr. Paget had not died as a result of this accident and had at some point in time, which we can't know, gone on to develop symptoms, and we're fortunate enough to have those symptoms inquired into at an early stage, would there be therapy available to him which might be effective?
Yes.
And what would your opinion be, as best you can give it on that sort of a basis, of the probable effect of the therapy available as of last winter, for instance, or as of today, since we're allowing some time for detection?
My opinion would be that he would have a very reasonable chance of control for a long period of time, or even cure. The exact probability of cure I cannot give, but I would reiterate that he has a reasonable chance of cure while it is in its localized form.
And touching on a point raised with Dr. Anderson, in your experience treating cancer patients, has their response to the disease or the response to the therapy any variation depending on their general health apart from the disease?
Yes. There are many circumstances in which other aspects of the patient's health may affect both their ability to resist the cancer naturally and also their ability to tolerate some of the rigors of treatment.
I'm not sure whether I mentioned this or asked you about this in connection with the world statistics, the world literature. Over what period of time, as you read that literature, have these statistics been compiled?
The bulk of the readily available statistics which I feel one can give, that one can rely upon, have been collected from the 20s through to the late 50s, because one must allow a sufficient period of time in which to evaluate the survival of patients after various types of treatment and times of diagnoses. So that in 1972, we are basing the statistics of the world literature primarily based on patients who came to the attention of the physicians who reported them from the 20s through to the 60s.
If we were so fortunate as to be able to bring those people back to life today, and were to consider then the chances of those studies made in the 20s today, what would your opinion be as to their lifespan? Would it be as it was then, or would it be other than as it was then, having regard to the advance in therapy?
My opinion would be that their life expectancy would be greater for two reasons today, if they were treated. One is because we have more effective, specific anti-tumor treatments today. And secondly, we have techniques of supporting the patient through the rigors of treatment from which they might otherwise die, such as blood transfusion, antibiotics, and other generally supportive techniques.
And I referred you specifically to that 1920 group. If we were to consider separately the 1950 group, what would your opinion be with respect to the same consideration?
I would expect the 1950 group to survive better than the 1920 group. I would expect the 1970 group to survive better than the 1950 group.
Right. If I could recap, Doctor, there is an indeterminate time up to detection,
Yes.
which Mr. Paget, I take it, or anyone else experiences. There is then a period of as much as 26 years, but for the fact that Mr. Paget might not live that long in any event because of his age, so that the total period for this disease is optimally 26 years plus something, right?
Yes.
Is there a possibility that during the course of the second half, the second portion, the 26-year period, there may yet be changes which would have a bearing in such a way as to extend that further in the way of treatment, advances in therapy, and the like?
If the rate of advance of treatment in the 70s keeps pace with that which occurred in the 60s and 50s, I would expect that treatment during the 70s would be superior.
And would that prospect have a beneficial effect on your present opinion that even today the chances of treatment of this particular individual might reasonably be considered likely to produce control or perhaps cure?
I would think that with each advancing year, the probability of effective control and possibly cure increases as research proceeds and we gain further experience with the developing techniques of treatment.
My lords, the witness has now agreed again with my learned friend, and we are in a critical area. I haven't wanted to interrupt. There has been a substantial number of questions in which my friend has led.
I was about to do it again, my lord.
Well, can you think it over and try
I'll do my
to
best
present
not
it
to.
in a way that isn't leading?
It's difficult, my lord, and I apologize. I was surprised my friend didn't object sooner.
What concerns me and that members of this jury will want to get as much information on this subject as they can to help them. And I may permit a certain bending of the rules if I can get it clear in my own mind the information you're seeking.
I appreciate the latitude that your lordship has indicated he'd allow me, but I'm almost forced to conclude that it would amount to fracturing rather than bending the rules, and I think I'll leave it. Thank you.